Hola, hola a todos, todas, hola a todos.
Hello, everybody. How are you? I'm not great for these type of presentations. I think all of the guests are already in the meeting. To begin with, we have a roundtable discussion of the BEAM with artists that are part of this special project, which is gazing into each other's eyes, going back to. And the name of this roundtable, you need to say about the languages. Do you want to say it, Gabriela? Yo lo estoy traduciendo.
The bottom.
There
Okay,
is
perfecto. No, hay un
in the
lugar.
toolbar.
There's a place in the toolbar at the bottom on the right where you can choose between Spanish and English for interpretation.
It's okay now?
Can everybody hear me in English? Who needs to hear me? Michaela, Mika, Nelson?
I can hear you perfectly, thank you.
Perfect. Nelson?
Okay, perfect. Bueno, si alguien tiene algún problema, puede escribir por chat.
If there is any problem, you can always write on the chat channel. So I assume that everybody's listening. The version Spanish or English according to what you need. So I will continue. We are going to begin with one of the round tables with artists who participate in this particular special project of the BEAM, which is gazing into each other's eyes, going back to. And as I was saying before, this round table has a very suggestive title, which in itself is almost a montage: Archives, Actions, and Listening. In this round table, we will probably speak about the sensitivity which has been affected by the senses, a particular sensitivity that takes us to the different moments of this pandemic, especially the moments to do with quarantine, where everybody had to stay at home and daily lives are led in a different way. We have Mika Tanila here with us. Hi, Mika. He's a friend from the Biennale. He's also my personal friend. He's from Iceland. We were already lucky enough to have him with us and to enjoy his artistic production in the BEAM previously. We also have Michaela Grill with us from Austria, Fernando Velázquez from Brazil, Nelson Henriks from Canada, and Joaquin Gutierrez Adid from Argentina. It is the first time he is participating as an artist in this Biennale, but he has previously been a collaborator from the production team of the BEAM. Now we've presented, we'd like to listen to the artists, to talk about how they managed to set up their works that are part of this gazing into each other's eyes, coming back, which of course has been greatly affected by this sensitivity that has been affected by this unheard of situation that the pandemic has brought on us. Maybe we can begin with Joaquin, who may be the local one, the one that is playing on their own turf to hear some of their words.
Bueno, hola, ¿cómo están? Gracias,
Hello.
Andrés, por
Thank you, Andrés,
hacerme romper el
for
hielo.
your introduction and
Gracias,
for asking
Andrés,
me to
y a
break the
Gabriela
ice.
por la invitación a
Thank you to
la
Andrés
participación.
and to Gabriela for
Bueno,
your invite.
quizás a mí me toca
Perhaps
romper el hielo y
I
quizás
can
de
break
todas
the
las personas de la
ice,
mesa soy el
although I
menos
am
videoartista o el menos abocado al video
the
en
person
torno
who is least working with
a cuestiones
video
meras de imagen, ¿no?
when it comes to
Quisiera
image.
trazar un poco el recorrido
I would
sobre mi
like to
práctica.
show
Yo
what
soy
I
artista sonoro.
do. I am a sound artist.
Me empecé a interesar en el video
I
mucho
began
después
being
que en el
interested
sonido
in video
y
many
me empecé a
years
interesar en el
after being
video
interested in sound.
justamente para poder desarrollar lo que
And
mi
I did
práctica
it in order
sonora
to
a
develop
través del sonido
my
más
sound
material y el
practice
sonido
from the
que se escucha, digamos, por
material
los oídos.
sound, the one that you can hear through
Esa
the
práctica sonora
ears,
no estaba pudiendo llenar mis intereses
that
y
was not
es en el
able to
video en
fulfill my
donde
interests.
pude
And I
empezar a
was,
desarrollar esa práctica sonora, ¿no? A
with
partir
video, I was able
de
to
esta condición del
delve
video como
deeper into
un
my sound
post-medium, como
practice,
transmedia, a partir
the
de sus
transmedia,
cualidades en torno
and using its qualities with
a que es
regards
un
to
formato
the fact that it
tiene que ver
is
con el
a
tiempo.
format that
Me
has to do with
parecía
time. I
que
felt
era un medio, un
it was
post-medium,
a
donde se
post-medium
podían desdoblar un poco las
where
relaciones obvias
the
entre
obvious
imagen
relations
y
between
video,
image
entre
and video
imagen y
and
sonido.
sound could be broken
Bueno,
down.
en el comienzo, en mi práctica,
At the beginning,
voy a tratar de ser
I'm going
breve.
to try to be very brief.
Empecé a
I
interesarme en el
began
sonido a partir
to
de
be interested in sound
grandes sesiones extensas de
through
escucha,
extended listening
sistemáticas,
sessions,
obsesivas, en donde
systematic
pasaba muchísimo
and
tiempo
obsessive, where I spent a
escuchando en una
long time
terraza a la
listening
noche.
at
Y allí
night
pude
on a
encontrar
terrace,
cómo había
and I could find
muchísimos niveles de escucha
many
diferentes
levels of
que
different listening
formaban parte
that
de una
were part
práctica
of a practice
en donde a partir de cierto
where
momento de
from
estar cada vez
a
más
certain moment
con
on,
mayor profundidad en
as
la
I
escucha,
began to
me pude
delve
empezar
deeper
a
into listening,
escuchar a
I
mí
could
escuchando,
hear
¿no? Escuchar
myself
la propia escucha.
listening. I could
Ahí
listen
creo que
to myself
me di
listening.
cuenta de
And then I
algún modo
realized in
que
some way
la escucha no era algo
that
que era meramente
listening
reservado a
was
los
not
oídos,
something
sino que
merely
era
reserved
un
for
dispositivo de
ears, but it was
discernimiento
a
de,
device to discern
del
things,
mundo en
the
sí,
world
del mundo en
itself
general
in general,
y de la propia personalidad en particular.
and of your
Es
own
así que con el video
personality. So with the
encontré
video,
que había modos
I
de
was able to
relacionarse con la
find
escucha a
ways
partir
to
de
relate to
una
listening
puesta en abismo
with
de esta misma situación, digamos, una puesta en abismo de la
the
escucha
way
a
to
partir de
listening to
imágenes que
listen
podrían llegar
from images that could
a evocar algún sonido,
evoke
pero que no
some sound,
necesariamente lo
but that did
estaban
not
emitiendo,
necessarily
¿no? Entonces, esta situación de
was
estar en
there. So the
contemplación con un
situation
objeto,
of
con una imagen
contemplating
que no
an
emite
image, an
sonido,
object
pero que
that does not
sugiere
emit a sound, but
una
that
tradición
suggests
sonora, que sugiere una relación
some
sonora, una
sound,
relación de afección
a
a partir del
relation
sonido
of
con ese
sound
objeto,
from the sound
al
that stems
uno
from that
estar en
object.
confrontación
When you
con ese objeto,
confront
con esa
that
imagen,
object or that
me resulta muy
image,
interesante cómo
I find it
hay
very interesting to
un piso
see
de ruido que empieza a
how there
aflorar,
is
en donde
a floor of sound
al principio,
that rises,
quizás lo primero que surge
and at
son
the
los
beginning, the first thing that
prejuicios
comes up
o
is
los
prejudice or
regímenes de
preconceived
utilidad
ideas
que hay con esa
or the
imagen y con ese
regimes
objeto,
of
y
utility
a
of that
partir
particular
de la
object. And
contemplación y de ir
if you
desmenuzando
contemplate it
justamente
and you
todas estas
break it
cosas que empiezan a
down,
aflorar, que
all
no
of these things that
forman
come up
parte de un
that are not
sonido
part
material,
of a
pero que ahí
material
nos podemos
sound,
empezar a
and then
adentrar en
we
una relación
can
un poco más íntima
get into
con ese
a more
objeto, con esa
intimate
imagen, y
situation with that
quizás
image or that object. And perhaps
podría llegar a ser, si esto es
if
posible de algún
this
modo,
is
creo que
possible,
si queremos
if we want to
adentrarnos a una percepción que
delve
tenga que ver con lo
into
pretextual,
a
con
pretextual
una dimensión que
perception
no esté
with a
mediada por el
dimension
texto,
that is not mediated
creo
by text,
que
I think
este dispositivo,
that this
encontrarse con
device
una imagen o
of
encontrarse con un
finding an
objeto
image
a
or an
partir del
object
silencio, creo que puede llegar a ser
stemming
muy,
from silence can be
muy
very
fructífera.
fruitful.
En torno a todo ese contexto que di,
When it comes to all of
me
that
pareció
context that
que
I've just
la
talked
oportunidad
about, I felt that
de
the
tenerlos
opportunity of
ahí a
having
todos ustedes
all of you
frente a la
there
computadora
in front of the
podía ser
computer could
una
be
gran oportunidad justamente para
a
hacer
great
algunos
opportunity
señalamientos, ¿no? Porque
because
la escucha, ¿qué es la escucha? La escucha
what
es
is
muy
listening?
ambigua.
Listening is
Primero que
something
para
that's
escuchar,
very
digamos, hay que hacer
ambiguous.
silencio y esto tiene
To
también
be able to listen, you
un
must
costado
be
político
silent.
súper
And this has a
contundente. El
political
hacer silencio
sense
puede
as well. To
ser
be silent
análisis,
can
puede
be
ser obedecer,
to
puede ser
obey, it
decodificación,
can be
digamos, un montón de cuestiones.
decoding, and lots of other
Eh,
things.
bueno, creo que me fui un poco de las ramas,
I think
pero
I've extended myself, overextended myself.
más o menos, en resumen, me parece que la
And
escucha, lo que ofrece, y parafraseando a un autor, Sepkin
paraphrasing an
Cohen, puede
author, Serkin
multiplicar,
Cohen,
¿no? La
this can be
singularidad de la percepción y
multiply the
llevarla hacia
singularity
la,
of perception and take it
pluralidad
towards
de la experiencia.
the plurality
Me
of
parece que
experience. I
con
believe
la imagen y con lo visual
with the
está todo
image
muy
and
dado.
with what's
Y
visual, everything
con el
is
sonido,
very much
muchas veces, con el sonido no está todo tan
taken for
dado y mucho
granted. And with
menos las
sound,
relaciones entre
this is
imagen y
not so,
sonido
and
quedan
particularly in the
desdobladas. Con el
relationships
video me parece
between
que es
sound
la
and
única
image
manera
are
de poder
broken
generar
down,
eso.
then that is not taken for granted. From what you're saying, I have a lot of things to say with regards to your actions within the videos that you brought to this cycle. These long shots with minimal action where there is a specific sound, which is those big speakers, and the action is minimum, and as a reference to that object that you can see, you're looking the generation of a sound, but the generation of that sound does not correspond. The sounds that appear don't correspond to the action that you're looking at or to
Tal
the
cual, y la
object.
aguja, las
And
agujas,
the
para mí
needles,
tienen un valor,
for me, have
también, un valor muy pesado en
a
torno a
very, very
cómo es que
heavy
el sonido
value
opera
with
en
regards
nosotros, ¿no?
to
El sonido
how
es
the
una aguja
sound
en
operates
sí,
within us.
para
It
poder
is
escucharlo, para haberlo
something that needs
decodificado,
to be listened
etcétera,
to, needs to be
tuvimos que poder
decoded.
imprimirlo
You need to
dentro
be able
nuestro, ¿no?
to
Entonces ese espacio
bring
de
it within.
referencia y
So that
contrarreferencia
space of
ya implica que el
reference and
sonido ya nos
counter-reference means
ingresó,
that
es
the
una
sound
especie
has
de...
already
O
penetrated
sea,
us.
uno es penetrado por
You
el
are
sonido
penetrated
y a
by
su vez es lo que
sound,
pasa con ese
and that is
objeto en
what
la situación de
happens with that
silencio.
object
Cuando
in the
no hay
situation
un
of
sonido que
silence, when there
media
is
entre ese
no
objeto
sound
y yo,
that mediates between objects. And
hay una relación un poco más
there is
íntima, hay
a
un
very
acercamiento que no
an
está dado
approximation, something more intimate that is not
por
to
lo
do
obvio,
with
digamos. Me parece que
what is
hay
evident.
sí o sí es
So
un punto de partida y un punto de llegada al
there
mismo tiempo.
is like a starting point
No hay
and
algo dado y es algo que hay
an
que
end
construir
point.
en ese instante
It is
con ese
something that you
objeto,
must
con esa
build
imagen.
then with that image and with that object. There is a bridge between the images of the video, the more radical videos that Joaquin brought to the project. There is a bridge between that image of a speaker that does not work on its pre-established function, and then how musical instruments are used in Nelson's work. Nelson, would you like to comment with regards to the process that you used to get these videos that are like a small series? They are quite different in the way they are proposed. At the same time, Joaquin's work is very long, and Nelson's works are pretty brief, and they're very concrete, and they are all articulated on a final point. I would like to know, Nelson, a bit about your creative process, especially and specifically how the process went.
Sure. Excuse me. Lo siento. I was teaching this morning and my voice is quite ruined. Y lo siento de no hablar español en la conferencia de hoy.
And not speaking Spanish today.
No me siento no tiene bastante confianza para hablar en español. Anyway, yeah, so my process was pretty intuitive in a way. I'm just going to do a screen share here, if you all don't mind. I was invited to a residency this summer. It was only 6 days in the country. Whoops. At this house that a local doctor offers to artists as a creation space. So, sorry, I'm just going to do something here, which I think helps. But anyway, working in this house, I found that there were several objects that interested me. So one was this clock. There was kind of like a photo darkroom installed in the space. And then there was a drum kit for some reason, which had a cymbal or a hi-hat, really. Be curious to know how to translate that into Spanish. And also a snare drum. And I'm sort of prototyping right now a new installation where I'm working with drums and kind of thinking about the relationship of drums and certain kinds of, drums to sort of militarism and power. Anyway, so I also had my reading list with me, which was a series of books. And I was sort of thinking of ways of activating the snare drum. So I started using these books, and these books are pretty much what my reading list was for the summer at this place. So a lot of stuff about social justice is concerning Black people in Canada and in North America. And I think that what was happening in the United States, what was happening with George Floyd, was very much on all of our minds here in North America, and the social responses to that as well. So for the proposition for the Biennale, I thought it was interesting to present the work in fragments, but then also present the 4 pieces together. And they really do work together as a unit. So this idea, I guess, of the importance of solidarity or of coalitions, of unity for social and political action to occur, I think was one of the things I was thinking about in putting these videos together like this, or just thinking that maybe potentially audiences to the Biennale could sort of experience the individual parts on their own, and then sort of experience like what kind of happens when we create a sort of a coalition of images or videos together, and that hopefully the sum of the parts is bigger than the sum of the parts. So the books I was working with were Oliver Sacks, so On the Move. It's kind of an autobiographical book about his, he's a neurologist. He writes a lot about perception and the brain. But Ibrahim Kendi, How to Be an Anti-Racist. So sort of autobiographical book about experiences of racism as a Black man United States, Montreal's own Robin Maynard, Policing Black Lives. So talking about racism in Canada, there's kind of a myth that Canada is not really a racist country, which is unfortunately not true. And then this book, Art School, which is kind of about art pedagogy. So just, yeah, kind of thinking about, I guess, literally instrumentalizing knowledge. And this book, unfortunately, didn't make the cut, but Jill Johnson, The Disintegration of a Critic. And Jill Johnson was actually this really amazing lesbian feminist activist in the 60s who did a lot of great sort of activist work. Anyway, I think I'll stop there, but hopefully that's kind of answered your, your question. But I can see some links definitely with Joaquin's research and the more political aspects of his work, that the political dimensions of his work that can be unfolded from it. And this is a non-alcoholic beer, by the way.
Bien, gracias Nelson por señalarnos cómo...
Thank you, Nelson, for telling us about your process in the creation of these pieces. We have the first step of these sound objects who do not produce the sound that has been preset by Joaquin. Nelson, a different way of thinking about instruments, musical instruments, and I can see a different direction in this path, which is Fernando Velázquez's work that works with a sound base of a samba from the north of Argentina and turns it into, or intervenes it with a remix that is pretty minimal, a variation that is pretty different. I'd love to know how that process worked and those decisions were taken at a sound level, but also how you decided to work with this musical piece, which is a folklore piece from Argentina, and how the decision was for its modification and the visual element that you decided to incorporate. Thank you, Andres. First of all, Nelson, Micaela, Mika, Joaquin, hello. I'm happy to be here with you. Gabriela and Andres for organizing this event in such a difficult time that we're going through. I think it is an effort that is both exciting and moving, that in spite of being virtual, we have managed to make it very rich. Thank you for the collaboration. I thought it was very interesting. I think the idea that Joaquin brings is very relevant of active listening, and the organ for hearing is something that we have forgotten as a maker of identity. We are also ears, and the dominion that sight has over it many times puts this to one side. Contemporary art in the last few years have been given much more importance to everything that has to do with the sound. And that responds well to the preoccupations that Joaquin had as an artist. And also I can see a relationship of my work with Nelson's, when it comes to the preoccupation on where the work stems from. I am worried now about some issues, for example, everything that's been happening globally with regards to minorities and injustices, such as the ones that have been going on. And this affects me from the new technologies as well. My production for video is just one side. I've been working with new media for the past few years, and I do interactive installations, augmented and virtual reality pieces. And what is discussed in that milieu now with AI is the bias with which these technologies were built. This technological artifact that has flooded the planet responds to a Eurocenter and the white North American from the East Coast, which tries to affect and look at the planet with one single perspective. So when we talk about gender minorities, Black lives, it is very clear that one of the matrices, I'm not saying this, it's something that I've learned. I am more, I want to listen to what other people have to say about these issues. These people from Africa, from the East, from Orient, and from the continents where we also have many people who are outsiders. There is no country that is not racist around the world. And one of the needs is to expand this technology in order to include cosmogonies to these devices that come from a matrix that is a Greek matrix, and how we can incorporate imagery that comes from Africa and the Orient, which are millenary and who are excluded from that context, besides from some contrasts. This technology that is made and that centralize the technology, they are technicians from India. The best programmers are in Brazil, in Argentina, and everywhere that go and study to these big universities that are in the central countries. So it is a vicious circle. And my work has tried to, within that, there is something that has to do with memory and the speed at which time passes in our time. And we gain a lot of information, but we lose a lot of information as well, quality information. We have access to a lot of information nowadays, but there is a lot of noise, and how to filter all of that. And the Samba de Valderrama is a classical samba. It is a very traditional tune from the countryside in Argentina. And for my generation, I am 50, I was born in 1970, was already mystical. And this was lost. We used to have access to that. You could have heard it at the club from your grandparents. It was information that had a certain mythology because it wasn't on the radio or on the TV. And how that kind of memory that is so essential, because that music that is made today can be remembered or accessed. You can access, how can the young people access this type of information? That's when I thought it was easier to make a remix and to use all of the noise that we have. So it is a composition by hacking pieces. You can choose any kind of music nowadays. And through software, you can turn it to a digital matrix. You can break it down and you MIDI, and you can get the harmony out, and you can get the interpretation. You can just find a piece played by a certain artist, and you can change the levels of intensity and even the feeling. And that's what I did. I picked a version of this tune, I digitalized it. I didn't convert it to MP3. I took the structural aspects of it to be able to register it. And I tried to make a call or to experience the crisis of memory and the need for that beautiful melody. Where does it come from? Where is it going? More as an observation than a recipe. And at the same time, the video that I wanted to build was something that had to do with noise and sometimes reminds you of something. Valderrama, I think, is a star, the morning star. It is Venus, the first star that comes out in our continent. And that's what the song sings to, which it says, where are we going to go if Valderrama is switched off? So this frenzy of the technology and forgetting the recent past even. So where will we end up if that is switched off? So it was kind of weaving an idea with that, with my work. And of course, an artwork is not a recipe. It's just something that you just do like a highway for people to go and find whatever. This may find that you may find that this, what I'm saying is too abstract, but I'm not even speaking about recent memories, the memory of our parents and our own memory. 10 years ago, we were different people, literally, because we had a different configuration. Technologies have already modified us. And how will that be formulated? What's going to happen with us? So that was a way to make a dialogue with these things that I am worried about nowadays. Fantastic, Fernando. Thank you. Speaking about memory, every time I hear that samba, I remember Mercedes Sosa, her voice. Once an interpretation is completely recorded, you can always do the big version of that musical tune. And to hear it with that robotic voice, dehumanized voice, is a counterpoint that is very interesting, especially in the processes of memory. In this present, which is almost ceremonial, with an instrument, even for meditation, the possibility of feeling the present and being attentive in your listening, and how memory can penetrate that. That's what I experienced when I saw your video. In that exercise, I had a sound element or a feeling of a sound sense that did not correspond to my memory of Mercedes Sosa's voice. I think it is important to say that all of the processes that I used in a very artistic way, so to speak, which is almost hacking, will be our future. Now we have deep fake, for example, which is to make realistic videos, but fake things. So music can be affected by these algorithms. So when I say that music, I refer to our memories. Thank you for your intervention. I thought that was very, very good. Thank you, Fernando. Okay, we will now continue with this small path to put some coherence forward, and it's just capricious to say it that way. We go to music. First, we went for the devices for reproducing sound, the instruments, and now music. And because we have arrived to the reproduction of something pre-existent in the way of music, I'd be interesting for Michaela Grill to tell us a bit about her use of images for films that have no sound, and the value that gestures that the actresses and actors did in the silent film era, this excessive gesturing in order to be able to transmit that kind of lack, knowing that we are wrong, the absence of sound in that sense of direct sound or synchronized sound, and that we go back to music with something that is very particular of the silent film. That's something that you do with Sophie Trudeau. I don't know how to pronounce it properly. In the composition of a sound piece that completes this visual part that is constructed from the material that you appropriated from silent film.
Yeah, I mean, this is not what we usually do. This is like weirdly turned into the year of found footage for us, because we got invited by the Vox Gallery here in Montreal to make an installation about film from the 1920s. So we were working on, and then thinking about history and how to understand historical images. I really like always to go back to Walter Benjamin and to, who said, like, to understand history, you have to kind of hold the flux of images. And take them out of context, and then the meaning will reveal itself. So that's what we did. We kind of, I can actually show you, like, put it in the background. Okay, can you see that? Yeah, okay. Yeah, so what we did is kind of, or what I did is kind of, I went through, I don't know, 4 months of silent films from the 1920s and ordered them in different kind of gestures or movements that I thought are very specific about film in the 1920s. And we used the music to kind of put them into our contemporary times to create a new meaning. And so Sophie did this by using loads of loops and electronic devices. So we were in the middle of kind of installing this show when the lockdown hit, and then we got the invitation from you guys, and you know, we were totally in this world of 1920s films, and also we were overwhelmed with the invitation because, like, you know, we were in the middle of the lockdown, and I couldn't like, even now I feel I have no reflexive power to make an artwork about this year because I'm still in it. So I need more distance to say something about what happened. So we felt all we can do is go into the emotional grand gesture of what we felt like at the moment. And that was just like screaming. And so we went back to women in silent film screaming. And it's, yeah, that's what it is. It's a very simple, totally emotional, one-to-one output of what we felt like, or what we felt like would be appropriate for the topic of the Biennale. And that's like, yeah, what you see is basically the installation where we only use like narrative films. And we also did like a live audiovisual show where we used scientific films and home movies as our material to work with. So that people who would see both would really get like a kaleidoscope of what the 1920s encapsulated in the framework of an exhibition that was focused on the relationship of image and sound. Yeah, we don't have to.
Gracias, Micaela, por acercarnos a estas imágenes y contarnos un poquito el origen.
Thank you for sharing with us the process of how you went to these things that is part of this cycle. And we've gone from the conscious listening proposal that Joaquin spoke about. We spoke about certain things to do with the deconstruction with regards to certain stories that are affected by some centrality of power or economy. We looked at those decolonial powers, and we went towards things to do with things that are arising from different political minority movements. And there is one that has not been mentioned, but it is seen in everyday lives in the work of Mika Taliga. Hi, Mika. It's nice to have you here again and to share some time with you. Mika works.
Hola.
He sent us a video that was very short, very simple, very characteristic of this situation of sensitivity because of the phenomenon of the pandemic, where daily lives is felt in a different way and with a different intensity. And what becomes important in Mika's work, who is also a sound artist with a very strong production, but what comes up is also an issue that is very important nowadays, which is the place of the wild, what is animal, and the space that animals have in our lives, even in our daily lives, but also in what are the economic perspectives with regards to those animals. Mika, you brought us an observation about listening to animals. I am interested in that. That is the place that you wanted to focus on from your personal search as a sound artist and a filmmaker. You found within this emergence of the daily occurrences, that detail of listening, the cats that are with you, because it's nice, because cats is something that was quite prevalent in different videos by different artists, because the presence of a pet or a cat that is with us every day has more value in this time when we are more sensitive and we are hidden away in our intimate homes. So I was interested in this panorama where pets, our friends, our animal friends, have a more specific and more presence. Mika stopped in the exercise of listening to the cats. Can you tell us how you discovered your cats by listening to them in a special way, certain things that happened?
Okay, I will try to describe the work briefly. It's done here at our home during lockdown. I think shot mostly in May and June this year in our kitchen and living room with my iPhone, and it's simply a cat video, like you already mentioned. But it started out as a situation, of course, also here in Helsinki, with lockdown and isolation and spending basically most of the time at home. And right next door to where we are living in this area, there's a big construction site. So a new residential area, new big block of houses is being built. And when the lockdown started, it was rather quiet on the streets and very unusual, of course, the situation. But the construction work next door that continued from Monday to Friday every day. And what they did at the construction site, that they demolished the old buildings down, and then they started doing a series of explosions to prepare the ground for the new buildings. And before every explosion, there's this alarming sound, of course. I think it's 30 or 35 seconds, this beep, 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 that starts going faster and faster, and then a big explosion or minor explosion or something in between. And for some reason, I was intrigued with this sound of explosion. And whenever I was at home, I wasn't prepared anyhow to work on this piece. But for some reason, every time I heard the alarming sound, I put on my iPhone immediately and went to the kitchen window and tried to record the explosion. And then I kind of started collecting miniature documents of these explosions. And when you invited me to be part of a this edition of BIM this year, then I kind of combined a couple of ideas that I already had. I wanted to do something with the two cats that we have here at home, work together with them, two lovely cats, Epi and Santu, and kind of noticing their reactions to the explosions, because to us humans it's quite loud, of course, the explosions, and it's something that it feels violent and destructive and so on. But the cats basically didn't care at all. They were sleeping or doing their things and didn't pay any attention to this series of explosions during many weeks. So this piece is basically centered around that situation, that whether the animals are listening to the sounds or not. And I kind of think this as a miniature musical piece, sort of music concrete, collage, perhaps. On the soundtrack, you will hear some of these explosions, and then cats purr, this soothing sound of the cats in very close distance. And yeah, there's no voiceover or no narrative storyline in the piece, I think. And I was intrigued that with the concept or simple idea that in this lockdown, most of the actions seem to be slowed down or constantly stopped, but there outdoors there's still something being rebuilt. Something is destroyed and then something rebuilt by these construction workers outside, and aiming towards the future beyond pandemic time, perhaps. So that's the simple idea that I was aiming to work with this piece.
Genial, muchas gracias, Mika. Mika trajo un...
Thank you, Mika. Mika brought a variable of this condition that we are living through, which I had not mentioned yet. I had mentioned the personal sensitivity, something that is very present, especially that I think we all feel. I began producing projects in a different dimension with the pandemic. And it is true that the confinement did not only generate a variation in our sensitivity and our senses, but also in our context. I don't know if that is the case for everybody in this round table, whether everybody lives in cities where you've had lockdown and therefore a transformation of the context and the environment. But I would like to know if you saw a transformation of your context or your environment due to the guidelines that we had to go through under the pandemic, and whether that transformation generated, like Mika is saying, a creative process or a reflection with regards to sound or the visual. I live onto a very, very noisy avenue, and my daily reality was completely transformed. I was able to, for the first time, live some places in my house with silence. Normally, because I live on an avenue, they're normally very, very noisy. So I was able to live in those spaces with a singular space, sound. I don't know if any of you had
me gustaría
a
agregar
similar
algo en
situation. I would
función
like
de,
to add something with regards
como
to
un poco entre lo que dijo Mika
between what Mika
y tu
said
pregunta, un
and your
poco en el
question,
medio.
somewhere in the middle.
Porque Mika
Because Mika
menciona
mentioned
esta cuestión tan interesante, está haciendo interferencia en mi micrófono, en donde
the interesting
los
issue
gatos
of the fact that the cats
perciben este sonido que para nosotros es tan
perceive this
molesto
sound that
y
for us
para
is so
ellos,
annoying, and it
ellos
doesn't
siguen
affect them.
durmiendo,
They
etc.
keep on sleeping
Y en función de lo que
And
venía pensando y
with
lo que
regards to what I
pensaba en
was
estos días
thinking
para
lately
traer a esta mesa,
to bring to this round table,
es, bueno, al fin y al cabo, si esta realidad
in the end,
post-textual
if this
del sonido y de la
post-textual
escucha es la que
reality of
justamente al
listening
fin y al cabo nos
is the
termina
one that
dictaminando la
in the end
reacción ante cierto sonido,
decides
cierto
our
otro
reactions
sonido. Y
to
en torno a la pregunta
certain
que vos
sounds.
haces, Andrés, si
And with
se
regards to what
modificó
you're
algo en
asking,
torno
Andres,
a
whether
si
something
intensificó el entorno
was
o nuestra
intensified in
sensibilidad
our
hacia el
environment or our
entorno se
sensitivity towards
agudizó,
the environment became more acute.
En ese sentido, yo
In
empecé a
that
notar que
sense, I
claramente había
began
un montón de
noticing that there was
situaciones
clearly a lot of
cotidianas y de
situations
sonidos que
of
quizás
sound
antes estaban,
on a daily basis that may
pero
have been there before,
sonidos que hoy en día
but
me
these are
molestan
sounds
particularmente
that
y me molestaron
now really
particularmente
bug me.
a sabiendas,
And
esto siendo como hasta
they
un poco
really bugged
policía,
me, and I was a
a
bit of a
sabiendas que esos
policeman,
sonidos no podían
that I knew that
existir
those sounds were not
bajo
due to exist
el
under the
aislamiento
lockdown rules,
social, preventivo y obligatorio.
the mandatory lockdown
No sé
rules.
si termina respondiendo un poco tu
I don't know if
pregunta,
that
porque es
answers your
justamente un
question.
comentario en el medio de las dos, pero
It is a
en medio
comment,
de lo que dijo Mika y tu pregunta, pero lo que yo noté
but
fue eso y
what they
claramente
that's what I
no me
noticed,
ayudó
and it didn't help me
a la práctica, digamos. Todo lo
in
contrario,
my
fue muy
practice. On the
difícil
contrary, it was
concentrarme.
very difficult for me to concentrate.
Además de la cantidad de ruido virtual que
Plus
empezó a haber
that
en la
the
cuarentena, ¿no?
amount
Como
of
una necesidad
virtual
también
noise
de
that was
mostrarse,
on
de que todo el
on
mundo
the
vea lo que
social
la gente
media.
hace.
Everybody wanted to expose themselves.
Sí,
Everybody wanted to
necesito
show
un poco de
people what they
campo,
were
aunque
doing.
los pajaritos canten muy,
So
muy
even
alto.
if the birds sang very loudly, that was even louder. Thank you, Joaco.
Maybe I would make an intervention as well in response to your question, Andres. Like, I would say that my life did not change at all. Like, nothing changed an iota, because I work at home and I'm always at home. So it was just a continuation of being at home. But I think that here in Montreal, we did have a very, very strict lockdown. And maybe Michaela can speak to that as well. But there was this absolute transformation of the sonic environment here because there were no more cars and there were no more airplanes. And I was almost really sad when the cars started coming back and when the airplanes started coming back, and you start to feel like, oh, there's a possibility to imagine what it would be like to live differently. And I think in terms of the context of global warming, it's very difficult for us to imagine a world without air travel or a world without always traveling everywhere in cars. And then suddenly we had this reality imposed upon us. And I think it opened up a possibility of imagining how our lives could be completely transformed and how beneficial that could be, that we could live in quieter, less polluted cities, and that would be sort of a desirable thing.
Yeah, I mean, like my experience was very similar to yours, because Montreal was really empty, but it was not just, it was also empty of humans. So, and I have a dog, so like walking with the dog in this kind of empty cityscape was just, I love that, because it was in a way like being in a science fiction film and with all the stuff that's going on, so you really felt like it was a weirdly cinematic experience at the same time. But it was also, because I tour quite a lot, so it was also quite weird to not tour, and still is to me, and still to have this idea of not knowing when I will be able to tour again, and to have this kind of, just like your social life is kind of totally different because, you don't go to film festivals and you don't play shows. So it's, yeah, life is much more quiet in one way, but then on the other hand, everybody is staying home and houses in Montreal are not built very well. So you kind of live with your neighbors everywhere, so you hear everything. So you started to become more part of the life of your neighbors. Let's put it like this. So it's a quieter and noisier way of being at the same time.
So, well, here in Sao Paulo was kind of similar. It's a very different cities, but yeah, the city stops. So we are near 20 million of people here. So imagine the amount of cars here and how all the noise of the city, the buildings, and this changed the soundscapes in the neighborhood. Um, at the same time, at the very beginning of the lockdown in Sao Paulo, perdón, estoy hablando en
Sorry, he wants to switch now languages. At the same time, at the very beginning of the pandemic, without knowing very well what would happen, it was evident that we would go through very strange times, very different times everywhere. And that could be interesting to document. I had seen that many artists, quite rightly, were saying that they were asking for help, financial aid from companies, from the state, and generally they ask for artists to reflect upon the pandemic. And many say, well, how can I do this? I am in the middle of this process. I don't have the capacity to understand it. And they demand that I actually produce something with regards to it so I would get some financial aid. And that was not my intention, but I thought it would be interesting to have some sort of register of what was happening. And in March, I started with a project very quickly, which was called the circaproject.com, which is a site where I ask people to send content, the circaproject.com. And it is a bit to do with an idea which is fascinating for me, which is circa, nearby, which is used in archaeology to give a date to something, knowledge that where you don't really know where it comes from or from when. And I got the idea that we were going into a circa period. And I was very, very much entertained because I had to talk about the project, I had to speak about it, and I was very entertained with that. And that kept me a bit in a dialogue with other people. And I kept it actively for 2 or 3 months. Now it is a bit dormant because these projects only live if you disseminate them or feed them. But briefly, I hope to go back to send it again so that people can publish things on it. But it also became a tool for dialogue, to reflect, because the artist that doesn't have, we know that the artist sometimes is like an antenna. They have a sensitivity that allows them to have access to the invisible. And although they are subjective from their point of view, so many artists discovered in the works they were doing a while ago things that were forecasting what was going to happen. And that is great also because you can actually reread your own work, and it might mean a starting point for other types of investigation or research. And perhaps the pandemic will allow you to do things that you wouldn't have done if you were in your normal daily life. So this is still a very, very problematic period in Brazil. Here, same as in the States, these are the countries that are doing worse in the pandemic. I am still at home with my family, although life should have gone to normal in a way. We are still trying to avoid this because we don't quite know what it is. There are situations that affects all of us in similar ways, although individually people perceive it and process it in a different way. And this is interesting because although there are many things that globally can unify, that may modify us, this is a moment, and what Circa says, this marks a present which is shared, whether we're in Canada, in Brazil, in Uruguay, in Finland, in Buenos Aires. Finally, there is something that affects all of us at the same time. And in that sense, we can see a certain balance, a dynamic of a balance that many a time we don't really see, but you can see in this conversation. I was just thinking when Joaquin was speaking about noises and Micaela was talking about the neighbors' noise, you get silence because there's no cars, no planes. And yet there are other sounds that come up from a more human activity or something that we didn't perceive before. Nelson was also talking about the environment, which on the one hand, we realize it is possible and there is a problem, but we also realize the dynamic of nature, how animals began appearing in spaces where they weren't before. Very quickly, nature began to go back into occupying those spaces that were negated before by culture. So there are some balances that happen there. And I think the question of distance also begins balancing in a different way. Michaela says, I'm so used to traveling and touring, but today with Gabriela from the Bienal, we found that we are having a social activity and a closeness which is mediated. It's not by sharing the same physical space, but we feel close in, which is much more a proximity, which is richer and more abundant than what we would have had even in a normal biennale, under the condition of welcoming invited artists, curators, and such to Buenos Aires, that perhaps we would not have been all of us together at the same time, or we wouldn't have been able to participate of these talks with spectators from other countries and even from other provinces from Argentina. I think that is what's interesting. And we can see that there is a certain balance that is being achieved. We've been here for an hour, time goes by quickly. And I would like to open the floor. Do you have any comments between the members, the artists, the colleagues? I think there is a question on the chat feed. I think there is a question on the chat channel.
And
yes, I've just opened it.
And I have a question for Fernando.
Bien, podemos entonces comenzar con la pregunta de Nelson.
We may begin with Nelson's question.
Michaela's work was presented in the context of an exhibition that was about visual music. And watching your video, I almost feel like the sound is being translated into image. And I'm wondering, do you think of your video as functioning in that in that tradition of visual music, or were you trying to do something different?
Thank you, Nelson. Gracias, Nelson. Sí,
Thank you, Nelson. Yes, absolutely. I am Uruguayan, and I painted and drew, and then I went on to video and then to electronic media. What I mean is that my tradition and my formal education was in both art, in fine arts, even in new media. So artists such as Steinbecker or the whole tradition of, I can't think of the Canadian artist name. Help me, Andres, Gabriela,
Michael Snow y más todavía.
Michael Snow, and the one that did the dots, the pioneer,
Norman McLaren.
the one, McLaren. And then, more recently, the recent tradition of visual music. And with this video, there is something I didn't mention. There is the intention of extrapolating, of penetrating the genres in very institutionalized environments. If you speak about a video clip, for example, in an art biennale, it seems that it's not the right place to talk about it. That's why I called it a video clip, as an irreverent way. The MoMA a few years ago did a whole chapter of exhibitions for music and for video clips. And my intent in that sense is that, and I also use the resources of literally translating music into sound. And there is this question, where are we going? Where are we heading? When you talk about desktop film, documentary, what the screen has brought to the film, and there is a whole chapter that anybody can make a film, and that gives many people voice. And if everybody's talking and everybody's producing, we don't have time to see what other people are producing. So it is a huge confusion that we're undergoing at the moment. And that's what I'm questioning even in myself. From which perspective and from where are we trying to say something? So that is a mix of all of that, pretty much. Thank you for your question. Okay, we've got a question by Marie Jean, and it is to do with the time. It says something like, several of your projects refer in one way or another to experiences of time in a formal or a political way. Do you believe that your or our perception of time has changed, or is in the process to change, or will change as a result of this current global crisis?
I think at the beginning of the pandemic, I felt that time really slowed down and that we kind of began to revalue slowness as a way of doing things, which I felt was very positive. Now, I think we're living in a distracted temporality, a kind of a time of distraction, and I find that very dangerous.
My experience up here in Finland has been, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. I remember when the lockdown started in March and pandemic isolation, we were talking here at home that, oh my God, it's gonna last until maybe June, maybe even July, and so on. And now it felt that the time traveled very quickly. All of a sudden we were in August, September, October, and it's we still have no idea when all this will end. So in a way, it's I have a feeling and experience that it's sort of enhanced the way we experience time, and also it has taught, hopefully, patience that we need to really slow down and take it easy and kind of not make too many plans. Take the time as it is. Maybe plan for the next week and so on. But really, it's a little bit abstract and hard to define actually this how this has changed. But definitely, one pays daily much more attention to time and speed of time. That's for sure.
Well, for me, time has also become like a loaded thing. You know, there's like in the beginning, it was the time of confusion, and then it was the time of despair, and then there's time of hope that it's over. So like I feel that time in this pandemic became like very emotionally loaded with what's going on or trying to understand. And in relation to politics, like I think it's very interesting, you know, that like so much political I mean, that's a probably very like North American perspective, but I thought that all the, like here in Canada, a lot of political uproar has happened during the pandemic, and of course also in the US. So, and to, like, I found it hard to react because all your normal reactions, you still have the pandemic on top of it. So how can you really make protest in times of pandemic that makes sense, and how can you possibly create any kind of political art related to this time that reflects it? So of course I have no answer to that question, but it's yeah, I think it kind of, for me, it opened these questions again. Does it really make sense to make art right now? You know, like, what's the point? It's don't we have like other problems right now than making art? And I thought it's also interesting because it was reflected very well what kind of where art stands in society, because it's the first one that gets totally closed down. Like, as long as we can go to IKEA, we are all fine, but every small gallery has to close, even if you're much safer there. So that I found kind of interesting to see that it seems to be still that art is an expendable thing. Also, everybody wants to have films to stream for free on the internet, and every festival like puts out output after output. There's no breathing space, you know. Like, I feel like every day I get like another festival is saying like, come, our program is online, watch all that stuff. And it's interesting. The time is slow, but you get bombarded with all this content.
Bien, gracias Micaela, gracias
Thank
Mica.
you, Micaela. Thank you, Mika. I will also talk about what I think with regards to this. As we were saying, as I was just mentioning the fact that balances are achieved, and we were talking about the dynamic of the recovery of nature, how animals occupied spaces that they had been relegated from quickly. And what I find is that there is something that is more dynamic than nature itself, which is the damn capitalism and its economic dynamic. I think we all live in a dichotomy in each of the countries. There is a different situation depending on their particular situation. The dichotomy was health or the economy. We must look after ourselves because we must look after life, so we confine ourselves, but we cannot be completely inactive for a certain amount of time because the economy must still function. So that duality, which is still on the table, it's either health or the economy. But they never questioned the economy as the one that we have from before the pandemic and during the pandemic, and which will continue after. So I think any transformation that can be generated through this pandemic will be quickly resolved so that everything goes back to a normality that is capitalist, and for this temporality to be signed by the production times, exploitation times, and profit time. Unfortunately, I have a very little optimism with regards to this. Gabriela, my colleague, wants to complement my comment. Generally, what's nice about this and what's great about this is that we normally have opposing views. I was just going to say that I agree. Okay, sometimes we agree, sometimes we agree. I wanted to comment on what Micaela was saying with regards to the presence and the demands of sin and the exploitation of the gays in our country, and maybe in other countries in our continent. The exploitation, and not only the receiving so many invites for festivals, but all the time to have something to say for the different shows. They ask us, what do we think about our work? What do we think about the pandemic? This made many artists react with regards to the informality of our work. And this idea made it that in pandemic times, in crisis times, many things happen in Argentina. We're used to many things happen when there is big crisis, but many art collective organize themselves to ask for their rights when it comes to fees and also to social security issues, budgets to do with culture. And although there are people who said that during this time, culture is a privilege, and to look after culture is a privileged thing, a great group of artists said exactly the opposite. If you need to fill Facebook, Instagram, and your screens, and all the museums need the artists to produce things, works to put as content, this is the time to protest and say, in order for us to produce, we need to change our reality. So I wanted to, I don't know if this is something that happened just here in our continent, in the South, but with regards to, of course, to Europe and to Canada, our condition is very precarious. There is a lot of job insecurity for us. It is true. I want to go back and agree with you, because there was, in certain aspect, a class conscience between artists. Sometimes we forget that we are workers when we're artists. There is something there that society puts us in a different spot, the artist. And sometimes they push us to forget that we are workers and we live under the same needs and circumstances and demand for rights that most workers have. A specific comment that Gabriela made really connected with something that I said before, which is the idea of the subject who said that we are too busy to pay attention to culture. You can see there the bias that I was mentioning before. How can you understand culture if you say that? Culture is what holds humanity. Perhaps he's talking about show business, show culture. Culture is any human activity. So how this bias, the perspective with which we see things, whether individually or collectively, have a very important role to play in how things play out in the world. And I think that this time that we're going through, many of us have looked within and made us question old truths that we had and say, okay, my world used to be so great and everything was working so well. How can something like this just turn it completely around? And that's what I was thinking. So nothing of what I thought was definitive is definitive. So I hope this time, this pause, we know that some people, perhaps for most people, the economic activity will pick up and things will go back to normal. But the utopia, my dream is for many people to wake up to themselves and to the role that we play in society as a whole.
I'd maybe like to add to this just by describing a bit of the context in Canada. At the beginning of the pandemic, the government very quickly started giving money to individuals. So people were receiving a stipend of $2,000 a month, which I guess is around $1,600 US, to give you a point of reference. But I don't know what it would be in Argentinian pesos. But anyway, suddenly everybody had a guaranteed basic income. And there was a lot of discussion about this idea of guaranteed basic income in Canada. They say it's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism. But suddenly you had this possibility of like, oh yeah, we could have a completely different social structure that would be different from capitalism. And what I saw in my entourage is that people didn't stop working, but they redirected their work in different ways. So people would start volunteering. They would start bringing food around and delivering food to houses for people who needed food. Linking this anecdote kind of back to the question of culture and artistic production and artists as cultural workers. This question of guaranteed basic income has really been picked up by a lot of artists who are really lobbying politically for this and sort of saying that, like, yeah, it doesn't mean that people will stop working, but work and labor will be completely reoriented in different ways. And I think that this is a really positive thing. I remember like talking to people like my barber and him saying like, oh, I really just liked being at home with my kids and I didn't want to come back to work. And I think it was nice for people to just imagine what their lives could be without having to work and how they might spend their lives. Sorry, this is very long and rambling. I'm going to stop.
No, me parece fundamental lo que
I think it is. I think what you're saying is very important, Nelson, the idea of thinking about work in a different way. Sometimes I argue or I talk to friends who are not artists who say that they understand that if you like your work, then it's not really work, and that work should be something that you don't really enjoy. And I say, no, but I love it. It is still work. And I have a right as a worker, although I love what I do. So I think taking what Marie-Jeanne asked with regards to time, it is a time to think of ourselves as our role in the social structure, to think of ourselves as artists, as workers, and to have a dialogue with others who maybe have never asked themselves and they thought that they couldn't keep going without working. There are very good, we have the idea of this universal income that I don't think will ever reach here, but it is a desire. It is a wish. We think of this as a right, but it would be ideal. But to give a small glimpse of what's going on, in 2015, in December or November 2015, the minimum salary in Argentina was approximately $600, which is already pretty low. I don't think anybody in Europe can actually think that they can live for a month with $600. But the problem is in 2015 in our country, the government changed, the politics changed, And for 4 years, we went through a neoliberal regime, which took the basic salary today in Argentina is about $215, but that's in official numbers because the dollar value is completely relative. So we are closer to $100 a month now than of the 230, which would be the official exchange rate for dollars. So that is terrible because we've gone from 600 to 100 in 4 years. So those realities affect us from a different perspective. And may I say again that many a time you understand that these are situations that can generate change, but you quickly realize that when the dichotomy is life or economy, nobody ever questions transforming the economy. And that is a lost battle where quickly we will go back to the same point. Nothing will change. And it is interesting because we are talking about salary, and the original question was to do with the perception of time. I think that there is a central element there to take into account. Okay, we have been talking for an hour and a half. I don't know if anybody wants to say something. I don't know who is listening in. And if people could look at our project in the BIM, this central project for the BIM, which is to look into each other's eyes, going back, and whether you have any questions to the artists or in general with regards to the platform. And if we don't have any questions, I'd like to know, what did you think, our colleagues, about this project that we did with Gabriela, which was really a collective construction? What did you find or really piqued your curiosity?
Bueno, yo me gustaría decir
I
algo.
would like to say something with regards to the site. It is a novelty, I think, within everything that we said of searching for new ways to communicate and to be, if they had the courage of try to build something that incorporated the instability of the time we are experiencing, the way of surfing, which is non-linear. The content is very, very good. And especially because it shows how knowledge is being bombarded, all this information. And personally, what is relevant is to be able to distinguish. Sometimes we're not even interested because the algorithms that we get know more about us than ourselves. So in a certain sense, this emulates a certain instability, but with a content that goes through because it is curated. And that is what is important in our time. And it's still a platform like Netflix or others where we have content that is extremely relevant and especially free. That's also very important. I was very gladly surprised by the site. Sometimes I get lost when I try to surf it and look at it. Sometimes you go to the site, you go somewhere else, you do a link, you try to find something. I think it's very interesting because it shows the time that we're living through and that difficulty of focusing on what you're interested. Congratulations. Thank you. With Gabriela, we tried to get out of linearity and to try to get navigation more linked to sensation.
Yes, thank you.
Mika?
I also enjoyed very much your website or interface or platform, how you call it. It's unusual. It's adventurous, wild, and there's a room for adventure. It's like you take a get lost in a forest. I got lost also many times, but in a nice way. I kind of embraced randomness. I bumped into very nice audiovisual works, and I had also sensed that I saw only a glimpse. So I had to imagine, and of course I will do a little bit more exploration, but kind of a feeling that it's very different from the usual standard film festival websites or platforms, at least in Europe, in Germany or Nordic countries, and so, which are great in another way, that it's very precise. You can watch everything in precise order and so. But here, it felt like human memory working, and not getting everything, but leaving a very rich and emotional feeling. So I enjoyed the experience a lot, and I hope you would do also something like this in the future. Also in the case that we are over with the pandemic in 2 years' time.
Yeah, I tried to imagine what it looked like in a real space, you know, if you could navigate in a real space, like on the website, you know, because it's in a way you're kind of inside of it, because you have all these 4 directions you can move in. And I just tried to imagine it like a big, I don't know, like a big balloon, and you're inside in, you know, and the projections are like really huge projections, and you can just weirdly move around inside. Because to me, the same happened, you know, like when you sent the link, I was like, ooh, which direction am I in? Am I like on the screen? Am I on the, you know, I couldn't even place my own work and couldn't even find my own work this way, because I was like, where could it be? Like, how do they see my work? So I like that there's like immediately this reflection onto your work by other people. So that's kind of, yeah, very enjoyable. And I didn't tell anyone where they had to look, because I was like, no, you have to go through the process of looking, because that's part of the deal.
En función de esto que preguntó Andrés, en
With
función
regards to what Andrés
de la
asked,
plataforma
with regards to
y
the
la pregunta
platform,
que hizo antes una persona
and
del público,
the
me
question that
parece que
somebody
lo
made
que
from the
está,
audience, I think what
lo que está
is
muy bueno de la plataforma es
great
que
about the
enrareció un
platform
poco
is that
también el vínculo que tiene el consumidor de cultura
it made
a través de Internet.
a more profound link between the consumer of culture through
Enrareció el
the
ritmo,
internet,
¿no? En los caminos
and
de llegada.
the rhythm and the way to
Me
approach
parece
it.
que está muy bien, que es un gran
I think
acierto que no
that
se pueda ni
is
avanzar ni retroceder el
something
video,
fantastic. You
emulando un
cannot
poco el
fast forward
auditorio,
or
pero a su
rewind
vez también
video,
situando al espectador
and you put the
frente a esa
spectator
obra,
in
¿no?
front of the work itself.
No hay, el tiempo de esa obra es
The
el tiempo
time
del espectador ante la
of
obra,
the
no
work
es
is the time
el
of the
tiempo de Internet,
spectator when faced
no
by
es el
the
tiempo
work. It's
de un
not the internet
consumidor,
time,
me
it's not the
parece.
consumer time.
Me parece que eso,
That's what I think.
que hacer eso es una tarea
To do that
más que valorable en estos
is
días,
valuable.
y los felicito a todo el equipo.
Congratulations to the whole team.
I think something, just speaking from the perspective of pedagogy, of being a university instructor and kind of working in this context of teaching a bunch of rectangles, I'm really trying to be more experimental, and I'm trying to do things differently and really use this opportunity to, for positive things. I mean, I think that the pandemic, the negatives are very obvious, but it is this real opportunity to experiment and to invent and to create new ways of doing things. And I think that this edition of the BIM, the Bienal de Imagine en Movimiento, is like a really great reimagining of a festival and what a festival can be. And I think it works very well. So it's nice that you took these lemons and turned it into lemonade.
Bueno, gracias a todos, gracias, gracias Micaela, gracias Fernando, gracias Les, gracias Joaquín por sus comentarios sobre el juego. Me gustó, hay como varios conceptos que se cruzan, me gusta lo de la conciencia, lo de la memoria humana. Creo que propuso Mica, poniendo en valor de alguna manera esto que somos quizás culturalmente, que somos un poco desorganizados, ¿no? Fue un poco lo que señaló Mica en un comienzo, ¿no? Pero bueno, nuestra desorganización, nuestro desorden, nosotros de alguna manera podemos comprenderlo como una armonía diferente. También es interesante lo que decía Micaela de imaginarlo en la espacialidad. Nosotros con Gabriela, cuando pensamos este proyecto, justamente quisimos apartarnos un poco de referencias tan lineales, ¿no? Con el espacio. Está bueno que eso surja en la imaginación, pero no quisimos emularlo en un sentido de espacio 3D. ¿No? Nos parecía que forzar la Internet a que sea un espacio exhibitivo falso era ir hacia un error, ¿no? Era ir a una derrota, sin duda.
It was, I'm sorry. There's something that Joaquin said that is a detail and something that we decided with Gabriela with the design of this platform, which was that each of the videos that you are constructing in this cycle would have seen with a particular respect. The time, we work with time, we are in a round table where sound is part of everybody's works. And of course, the video will also go in that path, in the way we work, in the way we produce, because we work in time. And Gabriela, we always feel that in order to access the real experience of each of the works, we must give yourself over to the temporality of each of the works. So you might go out and you might say, I'm not going to look at this work, I go to another one. But you can never do your own montage or your own edition by rewinding or fast forwarding to get the idea that I actually know the work. In the case of, for example, Joaquin's proposal, the Golden Cup, it is fundamental. Joaquin's works, you have no way of accessing that experience if you cannot do it by giving yourself over to that extended temporality of each of those videos. No, I didn't want to say anything. It sounds strange because you were asking, what did you think? And then we were like thanking what they were saying to us. It's fantastic to hear the fact about I like especially the lemons and the lemonade comment. It was very playful, the process. That's what we took, that's what we could do. And the first decision was not to do the same as every other festival. We didn't want to share links. We were sure about that. And then it was a stimuli to be able to do it in a playful way, in an experimental manner, And it was also something that stimulated our work. This was a very positive thing in these sad times. It was something that made us joyful. It was creative for everybody who was part of the team, to all the people who were involved. I wanted to say, Marie, thank you for asking. Marie was there from the beginning. She knew about this. She introduced us to many Canadian artists. We thought of many things with her. We imagined things to do about being here, about being in Buenos Aires. We could not achieve that, but it opened up the art world in Canada for us, and we are so happy to get to know her, and I wanted to thank her. Since Gabriela has started thanking, I want to thank everybody, my friends, my colleagues, for having shared this roundtable, and especially for being a part of this cycle. You are now part of our BIM family. Thank you, Mika. Thank you, Micaela. Thank you, Fernando. Thank you, Nelson. Thank you, Joaquin, for sharing your time and your ideas with us. Thank you. Thank you to the interpreter. The translations are fantastic. And thank you for the team, the technical team. And I want to tell you that the team that works with us in the Bienal, of course, they are students mainly and some teacher colleagues. Thank you, thank you. Don't you think that because you have invited us virtually, you're not going to have to call us next year so we can visit Buenos Aires? We would go. In a round table with Singaporean artists, we actually planned a tour that we had to go on a boat. Our heart is always open, and we're going to do whatever possible so we can meet anywhere in the planet, maybe in Buenos Aires. I hope that things will improve for everybody. So I want to say certain things. On Saturday, we will have a toast at 8 p.m. You probably received an email, but I want everybody to be here. We love that. We are missing all of the celebrations that we normally have in BIM. And we thought it would be great to have this kind of toast. It will be at 8 on the same channel. And today at 7:30, we have another roundtable with artists who participate in the same cycle. Gabi? I have to take a bus to go to the other roundtable now. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, thank you. See you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.
See you soon.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Yeah.